Thank you for joining us for our next installment of our small group study. Chad, would you go ahead and read for us?
Starting in Hebrews 4:14. Since then we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. Let us hold fast our confession. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we, yet without sin. Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in a time of need.
Hebrews is an interesting book. It really is, I would say, a lot different than the other letters. And one of the things that I think is really fascinating about, doing the kind of study that we're doing, looking over all these epistles of the New Testament, is I think we can kind of categorize them. Oh, they're the epistles, and think of them in kind of a monolithic way. But there's a lot of diversity in content and structure and theme. Hebrews is an interesting book because I think that there's a lot of passages that people know. The one that you read, for instance, or chapter 11. There's a lot of passages. There's a lot of little pericopes that people are very familiar with. But I would say that overall, the content of the letter is one of those that we don't. If you read the whole argument, as modern Christians, I don't know that we always know what to do with this. So Hebrews begins, who is it written to? Why is it written? Fill us in a little bit on the background.
Sure. So it's titled Hebrews, and it's written to the Jews, the Hebrews, who, for more than a millennia have been followers of the law and the Old Covenant and things of this sort. And so this is really a treatise kind of going over the New Covenant and how the New Covenant is better and kind of the necessity of it as well.
All right. So when it opens up, there's a lot of talk about angels and mediators and things like that. What's the purpose of the beginning of the book of Hebrews? Why does it start the way that it does? What's the author's intention there?
So he's kind of comparing the Old Covenant to the New Covenant in terms of how it was brought about. And the Old Covenant is saying, it was brought through the hands of angels. But the New Covenant is being brought through Jesus. And it's kind of showing that Jesus is better than angels. Jesus is higher than angels. And so it's kind of laying the groundwork to show that's even introduced in a better way, so to speak. But it's just the start. It's going to kind of show that it's better in every way.
So I think here's where, for a lot of modern Christians, the problem begins, which is they don't really understand what the point of this is. Okay, so the Old Covenant was through angels, the New Covenant was through Jesus. What am I supposed to do with that? What's his point as far as like we as modern non-Jewish readers? What can we take from that?
So I think the big thing is now it's direct access to God. Jesus co-equal with God here. It's one of those things that we have this elaborate priesthood, and even the covenant itself is mediated through angels, and so kind of the access to God is a little bit distant, or maybe a lot. And I think the point is now that it's not distant. Jesus, the Son of God, is the mediator of the new covenant.
So how should we think of angels then? As I remember the Frank Peretti books back in the day, and winged creatures. What do we, as modern people, what do we make of this?
So, great question. You don't want to think of chubby babies on a cloud with a harp, or, I think it's one, just that there is a spiritual realm beyond what we experience physically, and it's real, whether we're cognizant of it or not. But two, I think the book of Hebrews also makes clear that these are ministering servants of ours, and in some sense, it talks about us being made for a little while lower than the angels, but actually, in the end, having a higher rank than angels, and that we will judge angels.
Mm-hmm. And so, when we talk about the spiritual realm, what are we talking about with that? I mean, and here's where I think the problem lies: is our minds always strive to give some kind of physical, presence to this idea of a spiritual realm, but maybe is there a different way to consider it?
I think it's twofold. You can kind of look at, one embodiment, right? And there are spiritual things that don't have a body, and they're looking to be embodied in a way. And we can look at them as persons, if you will, but you can also kind of look at them as kind of the authors of ideas and things of this sort, and dwelling in the non-physical.
How does how does a modern person make sense out of those kinds of things?
Well, one, I think a modern person often just disavows it entirely. I think it's easier just to think of maybe Satan as the tempter, and one who can tempt us, but that also means then obviously he can, we don't hear his voice, so I guess we have to accept that, yeah, he can kind of somehow plant thoughts in me, or something of this sort. There is some impact that can be had there, but I mean, that's perhaps it's out. But I think, I think in C.S. Lewis's Screw Tape Letters, he does a really good job in kind of getting to the point that as moderns, we don't want to believe in this realm.
Right, right. And so if we take what Hebrews is saying and we say, well, this is mediated by Jesus, this is not mediated by angels. I guess there's an idea there where the mediation of the old covenant was through these kind of principles or ideas or things like that. And somehow that was not as complete or as good, as beneficial as being mediated by Jesus. What does that mean for us in a practical level? I find it interesting to kind of consider, well, what is exactly the argument here? Somehow this is a big enough deal that the writer of Hebrews is like, hey, you need to understand this. But I don't think we really give it much thought.
Well, I think maybe it's twofold, and one, again, it's the distance to God, and Jesus is co-equal with God. But two, Jesus is the Logos. He's the Word. He's the author of the spiritual, if you will. Creation emanates from His words, and so all of a sudden you're kind of taken from this, angels that can be the authors of ideas and stuff like this, to the one who creates reality with His Word.
Yeah. And so is there a sense in which we're only in the old covenant getting a piece of the revelation versus the new covenant giving us something much greater than that?
Oh, absolutely. I think the relationship to God and the access to God and is greater in every respect. And I think, I remember one author kind of thinking that maybe, when God revealed the law to Moses, Moses like, really, is this it?
I don't think you get a sense through the law of the intimacy, the love, the way that Jesus presents the relationship with the Father is something that I don't think that you would ever really get from just reading the law. And the care and concern for the lost, all those things I think are very difficult, at least to gather from just looking at a list of rules.